Almost 2 years ago, Israel responded to an attack by Hamas in Israeli territory. The armed conflict has continued for almost 2 years with no sign of ending and had, for a time, threatened to become a much broader war. What are the aims of this war, and how might all parties address these aims and end this current armed conflict? I'm Chris Mayer, Colonel, U.S. Cavalry retired, and this is the ancient art of modern warfare. In this series, I try to explain the enduring philosophy of war as it was, as it is, and will continue to be regardless of advances in weaponry or politics. Until now, I've avoided saying much about Israeli operations in Gaza for a few reasons. The main reason is an aphorism which I cited in at least one previous episode. This runs that the first casualty in war is truth. Adding to that cautionary note is that I have no direct information from that area, which makes it even harder to separate information from information warfare. I've had some training in psychological operations and I can tell when PSYOPs is in play, and it is absolutely in play by all actors in this conflict. Information from Hamas is, of course, immediately suspect. So too the various UN agencies that are either willing participants in Hamas propaganda or being negligently misled in promoting Hamas's narrative. Alleged journalists reporting from inside Hamas-controlled area are also suspect for similar reasons. I use the word alleged because of the proliferation of persons claiming to be journalists. It's almost to the point, if it's not already there, that anyone with a podcast, YouTube channel, or blog can claim journalist credentials. Israel has its own problems with the truth, and was cautioned as much last year when responding to allegations of genocide made by South Africa to the International Court of Justice. Anyway, the subject of this podcast is not who is right and who is wrong, but how to end the conflict. This is the question I get asked most often. Unlike the situation in Ukraine, the underlying conflict that must be resolved is perhaps intractable. Hamas is, in many ways, a tool of other actors in the region who will accept nothing less than the complete eradication of Israel and the Jewish population. These actors don't care about the lives or deaths of the Arab population in Gaza, the former West Bank, or even the Arab population in Israel. These human beings are merely thought of as tools to achieve their aim, which is ideologically and religiously driven. Israel, for its part, is driven by its collective memory of genocide directed against it. This is not limited to the attempted extermination of the Jewish people under Nazism, but the systematic pogroms against the Jewish people, going back at least to the destruction of Judea by the Romans and its renaming as Philistia, rendered in English as Palestine. This history of persecution and expulsion is what led to the League of Nations mandating that the former South Syrian districts of the Ottoman Empire, which included most of what is now Israel and Jordan, be established as a homeland for the Jewish population. Further, between 1948 and 1973, Muslim states of the region invaded Israel on 4 separate occasions, sometimes with European states aiding Arab states or interfering with aid to Israel. Now, this is not intended as a pro-Israel statement. This perception is important to understanding why Israel seems to ignore the opinion of much of the international community. Israel believes that it is fighting for its survival as a state and as a people. Therefore, it will do whatever it perceives that it needs to do to survive. So, how do we reconcile the call of from the river to the sea on one side and the perceived existential threat by the other? Honestly, I don't know. I do think that the long-game strategy of forging relations between Israel and other states in the region, such as through the Camp David and Abraham Accords, shows the best promise. Iran, however, remains outside of this process. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia suggests that the October 7 attack was deliberately intended by Iran to sabotage that strategy. In the short term, however, we need to stop the fighting in Gaza. As I suggested in previous podcasts, in ending a war, we should look at what the parties to the conflict claim to be their objectives in going to war. On the part of Hamas, if we can get past the chant of from the river to the sea, there is a claim by Hamas spokesman that the October 7 attacks were intended to produce an overreaction by Israel and draw attention to the social conditions and political aspirations of the non-Israeli Arab population in the region. If true, it certainly achieved the goal of what seems to be an overreaction by Israel, at least from our perspective. That said, the means and methods Hamas used to get that overreaction were unconscionable. They were clear violations of the most fundamental aspects of the laws of war as they have been understood for over a millennium. Israel, for its part, demonstrated that a just war must not only be jus ad bellum, or just in going to war, but also jus in bello, or just in executing the war. The International Committee of the Red Cross has been fairly even-handed in alleging grave breaches of the law of war to both sides. So let's begin by looking at the jus ad bellum part of this. Israel said that its post-October 7 goals are to free the hostages and remove Hamas as the government of Gaza. These can both be considered just causes in going to war. Hamas committed a grave breach of those laws of war, that is, a war crime, in both its attack and in taking and keeping the hostages. This means, however, that Hamas has it in its power to end the war tomorrow. To end the war, Hamas should unconditionally release the hostages and repatriate the dead using the good offices of the International Committee of the Red Cross. This will immediately remove the major casus belli from Israel. Further, Hamas should publicly state a willingness to negotiate an end to the conflict and an immediate ceasefire. This combination will clearly put the burden of peace on Israel. This won't end the conflict, but it will at least put a pause to the armed conflict aspect of it and open the way to achieve what Hamas representatives has said is its real aim: to increase awareness of the plight of the Palestinian people and generate international support to resolve that plight. To me, this course of action seems so obvious that one must wonder why it hasn't been done already. Or put another way, why won't this work? Here are my guesses. 1. It could be perceived as Hamas surrendering to Israel. Could be. But with proper information operations, it could also be spun as a Hamas victory, especially given the post-ceasefire international negotiations. 2. There would have to be some admission of the October 7 attack and hostage-taking as a war crime that must be brought to justice. This could, and probably does, implicate Hamas top leadership as well as Iranian control. This would probably lead to the collapse of Hamas, achieving Israel's second war aim. 3. If this conflict is truly being directed by Iran and perhaps other actors, Iran may be applying pressure on Hamas to continue the fight, regardless of the destruction. Even if any or all of my guesses are correct, and I think all three are operative, this doesn't change what I believe is the quickest way to end the fighting. I believe that the goal of the international community should be to pressure Hamas for that unconditional release while working with Israel for greater transparency in its compliance with the laws and customs of war. It may not work, but I think it is worth trying.